Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling one of the most powerful, misunderstood, and consequential ideologies in modern history, communism.
It's a huge one.
It really
Yeah,
is. It's a word that gets thrown around constantly, but, what did it actually mean when it was conceived? What happened when it was implemented? And I guess, why does it still matter today?
big questions.
Yeah. So the mission for this deep dive is to really extract that core vision, then track the, well, catastrophic divergence from it, and also identify the surprising successes that the rest of the world has, quietly borrowed.
Okay, so let's start with the essential definition, because if you miss this, you really miss the core idea. The fundamental principle of ideal communism is often summarized by that famous maxim.
From each according to his ability to each according to his needs.
That's the one.
Which sounds beautiful in theory, right? It just implies this sort of collective altruism. And if you follow that principle all the way, the ideal society Marx envisioned is, it's truly radical.
Oh, completely. We're talking about a moneyless, stateless, and classless world.
No rich, no poor, no borders, no government bureaucracy needed to enforce any of it.
And crucially, the system for generating wealth, what philosophers call the means of production, so the factories, the land, the industries, all of it would be communally owned and operated by the common public, by the laborers themselves.
So no private individuals controlling society's resources.
Exactly.
What's so fascinating here is that Marx didn't invent sharing. He formalized it for an industrial age.
Precisely. The foundational idea is thousands of years old. Anthropologists even refer to the earliest form of human organization as primitive communism.
You mean like hunter-gatherer tribes?
Yes, think 10,000 years ago, these nomadic tribes. They lived without money, without the concept of countries or borders.
Because they had to, for survival.
Survival depended entirely on mutual cooperation. If a hunter killed a mammoth, that meat was shared. It had to be to make sure everyone got through the lean times. There wasn't private ownership of land in the way we think of it.
So food, shelter, it was all a community resource.
It was.
So Marx was basically trying to apply those hunter-gatherer rules to an industrial society. That context it's everything. And to get to the modern disaster, we have to talk about Karl Marx himself.
The German philosopher, the father of modern communism.
Right. And when he published the Communist Manifesto in 1848, the world was being completely redefined by the steam engine, by the factory. He wasn't arguing against modernity. He was reacting to the brutal conditions of the Industrial Revolution.
He was a keen observer of power, and he saw these factory owners, the wealthy bourgeoisie, making laborers work these brutal 14-hour days for basically nothing, just subsistence wages.
While the owners kept all the profit.
All of it. And to Marx, this was just institutionalized theft. It was alienation. He saw society as fundamentally split into two classes.
The rich exploiters and the unpaid suffering workers. The proletariat.
Exactly. And the worker wasn't just poor. They were, as he put it, alienated from the product of their own labor. The worker makes the shoe, but the shoe isn't his. It belongs to the factory owner.
And his solution to this gross exploitation was this vision of a utopia, a perfect, classless society where the economic engine worked for everyone. And he called it communism.
But the manifesto wasn't just philosophy.
No, it was a call to arms. It laid out the radical steps needed to actually get to this new state.
The first step was revolution. The workers, the proletariat, had to rise up and overthrow the existing monarchy or the capitalist government.
And the result would be a state where the means of production, the factories, the farms, were owned by the public. So profits would benefit everyone, not just one guy at the top.
The manifesto's core goals were, for the time, incredibly revolutionary. We're talking free universal education, free healthcare, and getting rid of inherited wealth and private property.
The whole idea being that everyone owns everything equally, in theory.
In theory.
But these ideas were purely theoretical for decades. Marx was a philosopher. He died before the experiment even began.
Right.
And this is where we make the critical shift. From theoretical utopia to practical implementation, which kicks off violently with the Russian Revolution in 1917.
Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks.
Wow.
They took the manifesto and turned it into a political action plan. And, initially, a lot of their changes were genuinely revolutionary and positive for workers.
Like what?
Well, for instance, Lenin implemented worker rights that we now take for granted. The right to strike, limiting the work week to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. He also redistributed huge amounts of land from rich owners to the farmers who actually worked it.
Which was a massive social correction at the time.
Undeniably.
Yeah.
But then came the pivot. The moment the theory died and the practice became something else.
The nationalization of the factory.
Yes. This is the crucial divergence from Marx. Marx said the public, the workers themselves, would control the resources. Lenin said the state, the government, would control them.
And he argued it was a temporary step.
A necessary temporary step. But when the state controls everything, the whole nature of the system changes.
And what you see almost immediately is the slide toward authoritarianism. Lenin banned all other political parties. He just established a one-party state where you couldn't have criticism.
This is the start of Marxist-Leninism, what most people think of as Soviet communism.
And this is where the police state comes from.
It is. They used secret police to spy on citizens. Anyone who opposed the ideology, who criticized the government, they were jailed, deported, or just executed. The state, which was supposed to wither away, became this ultimate tyrannical power.
It's worth stressing, though, that not all communists were on board with this. Even in the early days, this authoritarian turn was heavily debated.
Oh, absolutely. You have figures like Rosa Luxemburg, the Polish communist theorist. She was a fierce critic of Lenin's methods.
What was her argument?
She was an advocate for what's sometimes called libertarian Marxism. She argued that communism required freedom of speech. It required real democratic participation right from the start. Otherwise, she said, the workers would just be swapping one dictator, the czar, for another one, the party.
And her criticism shows that the Soviet path wasn't inevitable. It was a choice.
A choice. But the path chosen was authoritarianism, and it just got deeper and deeper after Lenin.
With Stalin.
Correct. Under Stalin, the ideology moved even further from Marx's original vision. Stalin's priority was just rapid industrialization, and he did it by exploiting laborers under conditions that were just as bad, if not worse, than what Marx had condemned.
So the government just became the new factory owner.
Exactly. The government took all the production and controlled all the distribution. This model is often called state capitalism because the state holds all the capital, not private individuals.
Right.
And millions died from famine and state violence as a direct result.
And this divergence continued with Mao in China, whose ideology became, well, even more extreme.
Maoism is different. It emphasizes the peasantry as the revolutionary force, not just industrial workers. And crucially, it's open about advocating for violence.
All political power comes from the barrel of a gun.
That's his famous quote. And it's an ideology that's still followed today by groups like the Naxal Maoists in India, who are in an active armed struggle.
So when we zoom out, what's the common thread here? It seems like the catastrophic historical failure is that almost every country that tried a large-scale implementation of communism, it just quickly turned into a totalitarian dictatorship.
It creates a fascinating paradox, really, because you had communist dictators like Stalin and Mao, but on the other side of the Cold War, you had capitalist dictators, Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, who often used the fear of communism to get into power.
Which suggests the ultimate spectrum isn't just communism versus capitalism.
It's more like dictatorship versus democracy and freedom.
That's a really crucial insight, because it's easy to focus only on the death tolls and the collapse of these regimes. But to fully understand communism, we have to look at the positive ideas that the democratic world kind of unexpectedly borrowed.
Right. I mean, if you connect this to the bigger picture, a lot of the social safety nets and worker protections we take for granted today actually have their roots in Marx's critiques. The world, in a way, borrowed the fire without embracing the whole central command structure.
Let's start with that idea of a classless society. I mean, the forced sameness led to these boring dystopias in communist states, but the core philosophical argument
that discrimination based on race or caste or gender is unjust.
Yeah, and that equal opportunity should be guaranteed. That's now a universally accepted democratic ideal.
Exactly. The extreme communist take was, forcing everyone into the same house, the same car, which just stifles creativity. But the successful evolution of that idea is the establishment of civil rights movements and anti-discrimination laws.
So people can succeed based on merit, not on who their parents were. Okay, so the second borrowed idea is no inheritance. Marx was totally against inherited wealth perpetuating class divisions.
And while no functioning democracy has completely eliminated private property, which was his ultimate goal, they have adopted the mechanism of the inheritance tax, or an estate tax. It's a pragmatic solution you see in a lot of European countries and elsewhere.
Wait, hold on. If the inheritance tax is the successful takeaway, isn't that just a practical adjustment to capitalism? It helps fund social programs, sure, but Marx wanted no private property at all, not just highly taxed private property.
That's a great question because it really highlights the difference between revolutionary theory and pragmatic governance. Marx wanted the abolition of private property, full stop. What democracies borrowed was the principle behind that, the idea that massive unearned wealth transfer can destabilize a society.
So the tax is a way to solve Marx's problem.
Using capitalist tools, it mitigates the negative consequences he identified without tearing down the entire economic structure.
Understood. And finally, the most obvious borrowed success, worker rights.
The exploitation Marx saw led directly to the formation of worker unions, labor unions. They combat exploitation by giving workers a collective voice. And the minimum wage, now standard almost everywhere, exists precisely to prevent what Marx saw.
To stop owners from paying the absolute minimum for the maximum amount of work.
Directly addressing that core injustice.
So if the ideals were so noble and we successfully borrowed these key concepts, why did the full-scale implementation fail so disastrously so many times?
I think we have to look at the core conceptual problems that just made the system unscalable. And the biggest one, I think the key psychological failure, is right there in that definition we started with.
Working according to ability, but receiving according to need.
Exactly.
And this is the killer question for you, the listener. If you are highly talented, fit, hardworking, why would you put in an 18-hour day to innovate if you get the same housing, the same food, as someone who only works 6 hours?
That's the core of the failure. A massive lack of incentive. If a brilliant engineer and a dedicated but, average clerk both get the same standardized apartment, why would the engineers spend their nights designing a better turbine?
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't. And that loss of motivation to improve, to innovate, to compete, it leads directly to technological stagnation and eventually a total failure to provide for the population.
So that's the psychological and economic failure. But the practical failure, as our sources point out, is the power vacuum and corruption that comes from centralizing all control.
Right. When you abolish the class system and private ownership, you claim that everyone owns everything. But that creates this empty space at the top where control actually sits. And that void is always filled by a small dictatorial group, the party.
And they centralize all the power.
When the government controls all the factories, all the land, and all distribution, the people running the government become impossibly powerful. They decide who gets a house, who gets a better job, who gets to manage the factory.
And that absolute control over basic necessities is just a recipe for corruption.
Massive corruption. Bribery, favoritism at every level. It's the opposite of a classless society. It's a society where the party elite become the new, untouchable class of owners.
And as you said earlier, once one party dictates every single detail, it's not really communism anymore. The workers don't own anything.
It becomes something else entirely.
So after all this analysis of large-scale failure, the question remains, can true, successful communism actually exist anywhere?
On a small scale, yes. I think history shows that the ideal only really works in closed communities, where tight social bonds and peer pressure can replace state bureaucracy and economic incentive.
Like those early human tribes you mentioned.
Exactly. In the modern world, successful examples are rare, but you see echoes of it in communities like Auroville in India. You have about 2,000 residents living without private ownership of land, working for the community with minimal dependence on money.
And it's sustained by a shared ethos.
Right. But the moment you try to scale that system up to 20 million people, it just collapses under the weight of that centralized control.
So to summarize this deep dive, communism is clearly a complex spectrum. It's this intellectual journey from a powerful critique of industrial injustice through some beneficial social reforms, and then, unfortunately, into catastrophic political authoritarianism.
All because of centralized control and the crushing of human incentive.
And the enduring lesson seems to be the critical difference between the ideal vision of equality and the danger of giving anyone absolute power to achieve it.
Right. The successful ideas, worker rights, minimum wage, the philosophical push against discrimination, those are the gifts the philosophy left behind, even as the regimes that championed the full ideology failed so badly.
So since the fundamental failure of large-scale communism really stemmed from that lack of incentive for hard work and innovation in the industrial age Marx lived in, let's leave you with this provocative thought. If automation and artificial intelligence increasingly remove the burden of human physical labor, our ability, does that eliminate Marx's original industrial problem? Or does it just shift the control of the new means of production, the data, the algorithms, the AI owners, to a new, even more powerful elite, making this whole debate just as relevant today?
A complex question.
Something for you to mull over as we prepare for our next deep dives, where we will rigorously unpack capitalism and socialism. Thank you for joining us.